when I look at ACC scheduling, the first things that I look at, well, for any team, it's always interesting to see who they play out of conference. So obviously the Florida game is the game out of conference for the season.
Right.
It's interesting that the ACC season gets underway the very next week. So for any team in the ACC, they play 8 conference games. Therefore, they play 4 non-conference games. So typically those are stacked at the beginning of the season. But Miami dives right into ACC play against Mac Brown at North Carolina week 2 before their later non-conference games in week 3 and 4 against Bethune-Cookman and Central Michigan, and a later game against, you mentioned it, FIU. Did I hear this right? That's going to be played at the baseball stadium.
Yeah, it's going to be played at Marlins Park, which now stands on the site where the Orange Bowl, Miami's iconic former home stadium, once stood. So, like, literally in that exact same spot where, everybody went. You had, what was that, Super Bowl III with, or not Super Bowl III, but that AFC Championship game with Kellen Winslow.
Absolutely, 1981.
Exactly, 1981. Great year I was born.
It was Super Bowl III as well. That was the first 2 Super Bowls. The second Super Bowl was played in Miami as well, but Super Bowl III was Broadway Joe.
Yeah,
win.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of those things and more, the Miami's iconic home winning streak and all these different kind of things. Yeah. So in that exact same place, in that exact same location, now stands Marlins Park. And the city of Miami owned the Orange Bowl, and they said they didn't want to do the upgrades needed to make it modern, and they tore it down, and they, went through this whole thing. And Miami residents and natives, they gave like these big tax breaks and this public money to build this stadium and all this stuff, which you can read about. Like, I'm not a South Florida native, so it doesn't hit me the same way. I'm a Miami alum, so it hits me in that kind of a way. But yeah, Miami and FIU is going to be played at the baseball stadium at Marlins Park on November the 23rd. So that is the next to last, the penultimate week of the football schedule. So the week before Thanksgiving again. And, with 14 weeks, not 13, that's why that'll happen. It'll be sufficiently late where, baseball season is over anyway, and the Marlins season is going to be over pretty much way before that. So the site and location is going to be available. But that's kind of where it goes with it. So since that game is going to be next to last on the schedule, then you have an opening earlier. So it said, cool, Miami at North Carolina, September 7th, week 2. So that'll be an interesting game. Mac Brown returning to the sidelines after almost a decade in the booth with ESPN. Bethune-Cookman week 3. That's going to be your HBCU sacrificial lamb. It's going to be a pretty full Hard Rock Stadium because there are a lot of players on Bethune-Cookman's roster who are from South Florida, and a lot of alumni from Bethune-Cookman who live in South Florida and are from South Florida. And the Bethune-Cookman Wildcat Marching Band is one of the best around in the world of HBCU bands. So people come out for that. Like they do for any HBCU kind of game. If you are from Florida and know of the Florida Classic, which is Bethune-Cookman versus FAMU, obviously that halftime in the 5th quarter after the game when the bands play against each other is a huge kind of involvement and engagement there. So having that. And then Central Michigan comes down and their new coach, Jim McElwain, who formerly from the University of Florida. So all that in September. Then you got a bye week, the last week of September. So 4 games in a bye. And that's right in the middle of a 5-game homestand. So weeks 3, 4, 6, 7, and 8 are all home games in a row. So that's Bethune-Cookman, Central Michigan, a bye week, Virginia Tech, Virginia on a Friday night, and then Georgia Tech, 5 home games in a row. Which is, it's nice, to be able to have that. But then that means that 4 of your last 5 are going to be away, even though one of those is it's away at Marlins Park. So it's still local. So 3 real away games. But it kind of sets up in an interesting kind of a way. And just as an aside, Miami always does good ratings on ESPN's Thursday Night Football. Miami is also one of the most successful winning teams on ESPN's Thursday Night Football. I am very surprised that there is no Miami Hurricanes Thursday Night Football game this year. There is the Friday night game, which is the same that Boston College was last year, was a Friday night game, but Miami had a Thursday and a Friday. Maybe it's part and parcel of being 7-6 and coming off of, a not stellar season. Maybe Miami will return to having a Thursday night game in 2020. And I mean, I usually like those just because it's a little different. You know, you still get that midweek spotlight kind of spot. And again, Miami does good ratings for ESPN. So you're getting viewers on a Thursday night because Miami has a national brand and Miami wins games on Thursday night. So let's do that. I was intrigued to see that Miami does not have a Thursday night game, but I think that in the future that's going to come back to the schedule. So yeah, we are through all of that all the way almost until November 2nd.
In scanning just some of the other ACC schedules, so there's and the ACC, I would be willing to bet plays more Thursday night games than any of the other Power 5 conferences by far. Pitt plays North Carolina on a Thursday. There's a Georgia Tech NC State game on a Thursday. There's a North Carolina Wake Forest game on a Thursday. And I just looked at 3 schedules. Those are the 3 schedules I looked at, and all 3 of those other teams had at least one Thursday night game. So this is what comes to mind, Cam, when I look at anybody's schedule is, first of all, the non-conference games. So we touched on that. It's also the Big 12 is the only conference that plays a pure schedule in regards to everyone plays everyone. So you don't really need to look at, it's just a matter of where you play them and when do you play them. You play everyone.
Right.
But otherwise, there is a large discrepancy of strength of schedule within the conference.
Facts. In
the Big Ten, the ACC, the SEC, and the Pac-12, and especially in the ACC and the SEC, because you've got 14 team leagues playing only 8 conference games. So you're missing 5 teams. Now, the formula in the SEC and the ACC is rather simple. You play everyone in your division. You've got your crossover rival for Miami. That's, of course, Florida State, which is a disadvantage. I know Miami wouldn't have it any other way, but is typically a disadvantage because Florida State has been the best team in the conference for years and years and years. And even after Clemson took over, was the usually second best team in the conference over the last 5 years. So that's a disadvantage to Miami having to play Florida State. So I always look at who else do they have to play, because that rotates. Well, that comes up pretty well for the Canes this year. It's Louisville, who was by far the worst team in the conference last year. And the other thing that comes to mind in looking at the schedule that seems to be different than typical years is that Virginia Tech typically is a November game, like a first, second, third week in November game, trying to set the stage for what is typically a main game to decide the division. Florida State's a late season game that is typically a September game or early October game.
Yeah, Florida State's usually the first weekend in October-ish, somewhere in there. So yeah, that has been inverted, like pretty much flipped. So Virginia Tech is at Miami, so it's a home game for the Canes on October the 5th, and then at Florida State is November the 2nd. So that is a little bit later. It's week number 10, or game number 10 and week 10. Game number 9, week number 10, excuse me, for the Canes to head up to Tallahassee. So obviously that is the biggest game on the schedule. And I mean, it's kind of co-biggest games this year since we play Florida. So August 31st and November 2nd. The weekend before Florida State, Miami travels to Pittsburgh. So that's October 26th at Pittsburgh, and then on the road again to Florida State the next week before hosting Louisville, on November the 9th. And then the second bye week. And then you end with the road game at Marlins Park, which is closer to Miami's campus than FIU's campus, but I digress. And then at Duke, the last week of the season. And I tweeted this out and I said, I love that the ACC stopped trying to make fetch happen. Shout out to Mean Girls, the movie, by not having Miami and Pittsburgh the last week of the year, because they were trying to push that for years and say, oh, this is going to be our final week matchup. This is going to be the thing. It's going to become a thing. It was kind of like, who was it? Central Florida and Connecticut. And Connecticut tried to make that conflict or whatever trophy, and, with the FL and the CT for the states, capitalized. And Central Florida was like, nah, like, we're just playing a game, whatever. But yeah, I love that they stopped trying to make a thing happen. Like, it's not a thing. Like Miami and Pittsburgh, like, we played, yeah, sure, in the Big East days and now in the ACC days, but it's not like a rivalry. It's not Florida State or Florida or anything like that. So, yeah, switch that around. So travel to Duke on the Saturday after Thanksgiving for the last game of the year. So, yeah, that second half of the season, weeks 9 through 14, you have at Pittsburgh, at Florida State, home against Louisville. And we don't know what Louisville's going to be like because they have a new coach, Scott Satterfield, who used to be at Appalachian State coming down, obviously building a staff, rebuilding that program and things like that. So we'll see what happens there. There's a bye week on November 16th. Then you're against FIU at Marlins Park on the 23rd and at Duke on the 30th. So, it's an interesting kind of a schedule. It is interesting because there are 4 first-year coaches on the schedule as well. That's North Carolina with Mac Brown. That is Georgia Tech with Jeff Collins. That is Louisville with Scott Satterfield, and Central Michigan with Jim McElwain. There it is. That's the 4th one. So, yeah, 4 first-year coaches, and Miami has a first-year coach and first-time head coach on top of that. So, yeah, I mean, you're going to see a third of the schedule has new coaches. So, obviously, there might not be the carryover from previous years and things like that where you can just say, okay, cool, we already know what to expect. And I will say I am so glad to not have to see that 1873 wishbone veer option offense from Georgia Tech anymore. Like, it's gone. And, for the defensive linemen, I'm happy for them because you're dealing with these cut blocks all the time and just everything. Like, yeah, I mean, Jeff Collins is probably going to have a couple of years to change everything over because you recruit guys of a specific skill set to fit that offense. You know what I mean? So, like, to change it from what it was schematically to what it could be at Georgia Tech is probably going to take a little bit of time. But, yeah, you're going to have, like I said, 4 new head coaches on the schedule, a front-heavy home schedule, including that 5-game homestand with a bye week in between. So you're talking what? So you're on the road in week 2, and you're not on the road again until week 9. So you have 7 weeks in a row where they're either having a home game, 6 weeks in a row before you leave, or either you have a home game or a bye week. That's pretty advantageous before having a road heavy back half of the schedule. So, I think things line up for Miami well, but again, Miami is a 7-6 team. Miami is an average team right now, and your record is who you are until you have the ability to step on the field and prove otherwise. So, I'm not going to sit here like last year and say, hey, Miami's going to be favored in every game and we should win 12 or 11 games or something like that. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I'm hopeful. I'm excited to see what's going to happen, but that is the schedule. The home schedule is a little weaker than you would like, obviously, with no Florida State coming down. But, I mean, if Virginia and Virginia Tech back-to-back weeks, cool. But, I mean, outside of Virginia Tech and maybe Louisville, and, I mean, maybe we'll see what happens with Virginia and Georgia Tech. But, yeah, the home schedule for season ticket holders and local Miami fans is not as enticing and engaging as, it could be. But, hopefully if Miami is winning games, then people will still be coming out.
Okay, Cam, you've hit on the game that is screaming at me as a sneaky, huge matchup. Okay. And that's Friday night. You already hit on Friday night in absence of a Thursday night game. And Virginia, for as much as that was a disappointing game for Miami to lose and snickering, thinking we shouldn't lose to those guys, and you shouldn't.
Exactly.
Man, Bronco Mendenhall can coach, and he's building something there. And they took a 7-5 SEC team, South Carolina, to the woodshed in that bowl game, 28-0. They're getting a lot better.
Bring it on. Like, I mean, Miami turned the ball over 4 times that game. Obviously,
I'm just saying
like that was when Mark Richt decided, hey, against better judgment and any kind of rational thought, we're going to put Malik Rozier back out here and stunt the development of N'Kosi Perry, who's clearly the far superior player on physical ability and talent. And that came back to bite them and things like that. And I believe after that game was the game when Jeff Thomas quit also. But yeah, I mean, it just, it's a thing. 2019 is going to be another revenge tour season. And 2017 was a revenge tour season after 2016, again, with a 4-game losing streak and, losing to some teams that Miami should not have lost to. But yeah, that game right there, that Friday night. So it's a little bit of a short week. Coming on October the 11th, again, that Friday, not Saturday, in between the Techs. So Virginia Tech is the week before and Georgia Tech is the week after. Yeah, I mean, that's a sneaky game. But again, Miami does not have the cachet or the ability to overlook anybody. So every game is a big game. Every game we have to lend our full attention. And if and when the scoreboard dictates that we can ease off the gas or we can kind of assume the the result, then we'll do that. But as I sit here right now, again, you got to show and prove, and all that goodwill and all that kind of cachet and all, the benefit of the doubt that you grew through that 10-game winning streak in 2017, all that's gone. It's a new staff. It's a new coach. It's a new scheme on offense. We got new players because we have, 3 and 4 year contributors who are either, transferring away or have graduated. Yeah. So, I mean, that is a game that I'm looking at. But then again, every game I'm looking at, but the 2 games again, August the 31st, Orlando against Florida, November the 2nd, Tallahassee at Florida State. Those are the games. Those are the things that around which everything else gravitates in the schedule. So that's where you have to start and build out from there. But yeah, every game is a game that Miami has to focus on.